me from the organizing committee invite you all to the 23rd conference of DNACon and 19th Neuro Nurses Update. So here is, I will invite the chairperson, Dr. Himanshu Arora, Dr. Kunal Behrani, and Dr. Navdeep to chair the session.
Good afternoon, sir. Myself, Dr. Kanishk, and I am from G. Pant Hospital. I am presenting the topic, the factors affecting surgical outcome in patients of trigeminal neuralgia following the microvascular decompression surgery. Trigeminal neuralgia is characterized by the unilateral paroxysmal lanceolating recurrent pain in one or more branches of the fifth cranial nerve. The most common etiology of the trigeminal neuralgia is due to the neurovascular conflict, which is blood vessel compressing the root entry zone of the trigeminal nerve. Over the multiple many factors. So the aim and objective of this study is to study these factors which affect the surgical outcome in MVD in 1.5 month, half year of period. And we followed these patients post-operatively at the interval of 3 months up to 1 year. And the pain outcome was graded using the Barrow Neurological Pain Scale, and the success rate was defined as pain relief without any medication in these patients post-operatively. And the prognostic considered classified in three groups: the patient-related factors, the neuralgia-related factor, anatomical findings. The patient-related factors, in patient-related factors, we consider the demographic data of the patient, like the age, sex, and the any history of any chronic disease like the systemic hypertension or duration of neuralgia. The factors related to neuralgia are the operative side, topography of the trigeminal nerve, any what type of pain is there, pain, clinical
Dr.
include
Kanishk,
the
I am sorry for interrupting, Dr. Kanishk, but suddenly your voice goes away, and I think maybe it may be because of a bad internet connection or something.
connected to Wi-Fi,
In middle, in middle, following you absolutely. You are on to the factors.
factors. We divided the factors in three groups: the patient-related factors, in which we include the demographic data of the patient, like the age, gender, history of any chronic disease, or the duration of the neuralgia. And second, the factors related to neuralgia, in which we include the topography of the trigeminal nerve, extent of the surgery, and the type of pain. It's typical or atypical. The factors related to intraop anatomical findings, in type of compressing vessel is there, either artery or vein, the NVC severity, the location, the presence of any focal erectogenitis or the addition to the root. So in our results, the cure rate, which we include the patients with no post-operatively any treatment is required. We see the patients on the 10th day, which is the discharge day. So 96.8% have the favorable outcome, and at 3 months, 93.5% has favorable outcome, and out of which major effect on the prognosis, except the age. In our study, we see that the older patients, more than 50 years, has a better outcome, but it was not clinically, statistically significant. The atypical presentations, the side of neuralgia and the topography does not have any effect on 1 year follow-up, and it was also statistically significant. Samewise, the lower success rate was recorded for the pure venous compression over the arterial compression. And also in patients with focal erectogenitis, the outcome is poor. When we see the anatomical factors, the more severe the degree of pre-op compression, the better the outcome is 6 months and 1 year follow-up.
Kanishk, can I ask you something? Why do you think that the success rate fell down from around 97% on the 10th post-op day to around 90%? It has fallen down by around 7%, right?
Yes, sir. These are the factors. In some patients, the erectogenitis is present, and in some patients, only venous compression was there. And these are the factors which affect the long-term outcome. As we see sir, in next slides.
We can discuss that. Why the percentage can fall from 97% to 90% from 10 days to, I think, 1 year?
Yes, sir. Over the period of 1 year, sir.
So they have said ki arterial thing is
Sir,
arterial
in
is
patients
better.
who has no sir, yes sir, arterial only if in some patient there is a venous compression, in some patients there is arterial compression. But
Absolutely.
when we see only venous compression is there, isolated venous compression, these patients has over a period of 1 year has a poor outcome. Means these patients required treatment in form of any pain relief, pain relievers, and pain scale. Likewise, if erectonitis is present in some patients,
Hmm.
and all three division, if the patient has all the three division involved, there also these patients has a poor outcome. So this is the third slide, sir. Sir, in this, as we previously discussed, sir, in first graph, as we see that when one division and two divisions are included, the pain outcome is favorable. But when all the three divisions were included, 3 patients out of the 8 patients has unfavorable outcome. Likewise, when pure venous compression is there, and when we compare it with the arterial or artery with vein, there is unfavorable outcome in pure venous. Means these patients required post-operatively treatment in form of pain relief, and if patient has presence of focal erectonitis, these patients also required post-operatively pain control. So conclusion is if patients in our study, the patients with more than 50 years, and when the more severe the degree of compression has a better outcome. So we should not omit the old age patients from the point of view that these patients doesn't require surgery. We should consider these patients and should give proper chance for the surgery, these the patients also. The patients with involvement of all the three divisions of nerve with pure venous compression and presence of focal erectonitis shows the poor outcome following the MVD. And the limitation is that the sample size is very small, sir, only 31 patients, and the follow-up is only of 12 months. Sir, in this, this is the sir, entropic, sir.
Yeah.
We
So
use
which is
the
the
Teflon ring graft. Sir, we use the Teflon ring graft, sir, for the in MVD, sir.
Can you label the structures which you can see with your
Yes, sir.
cursor?
Yes, sir. So this is the 7th, 8th nerve complex, sir.
Yes.
And this is the fifth nerve, sir.
Yes.
And this is the vascular compression, sir. And this is Teflon ring graft, which was placed between the vessel and the fifth nerve, sir.
Anything else you would like to comment? Okay.
Yes, sir.
Good job.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, thank you, Kanish. But the same question I would ask again, why do you think let's not comment or compare the two. One thing is comparing कि एक का arterial है, एक का venous है.
Yes, sir.
Second thing is comparing कि कितनी nerve roots involved हैं. सिर्फ
Yes,
V1 है, V2 है, V3.
Yes, sir.
But why would the total percentage of this thing would fall?
Sir, because these patients, sir, we are seeing the outcome in as we based according to BNI. We took BNI as a basic for, and we divide the BNI in two groups, either favorable or unfavorable. And these
Yes.
patients required in which these factors affecting the outcome, and these requires the pain relief. So we consider these patients as a failure of our MVD. So these patients, these are the factors which are affecting the outcome, sir.
Okay. Okay.
I think.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Dr. Himanshu Arora and Dr. Kunal Bharani, sir. I think we should invite the next speaker.
So how do I tap to see all the participants? I mean, to see all the people around?
Sir, it is showing on my screen. Actually, I
Kuldeep
think
Singh is the
Dr.
next.
Kunal is muted. I think he can unmute his mic, and sir, you can speak.
Yeah, I have joined. I am there.
Hi, Dr. Kunal. How are you?
Hi.
I can see him now. Yeah. Nice to see you, buddy.
Now, sir, we can invite the next speaker.
I think
Good afternoon, respected teachers and all my dear friends who are attending the conference. The topic I'm going to present is a fundus evaluation using imaging during pandemic, a real life experience. The background to this topic was fundus examination using direct ophthalmoscopy still remains a highly informative investigation in patients with neurosurgical pathologies. However, due to the COVID-19 pandemic, direct ophthalmoscopy carried a high risk of cross-infection. And the same thing prompted us to explore the use of indirect ophthalmoscopy using imaging cameras for evaluating the fundus. The materials and methods, we studied 80 patients consecutively admitted in our wards, in neurosurgery wards, with brain tumors, hydrocephalus, and vascular anomalies. Digital fundus imaging was carried out using a handheld Bosch fundus camera, with the examiner taking adequate precautions as to prevent cross-infection. The camera itself came with an inbuilt storage space up to 4 GB, and to enable the data to be transferred, there was a USB cable also. The results we obtained, we could find numerous advantages with this technique, that this did not require any close contact with the patient, and a distance of at least 1 feet was maintained during the examination. There was no need for mid-ray assist with this method. The image could be stored, could be compared with the previous pictures, and this also enabled us to complete our neurological examination, and purpose of learning, teaching, and correlation with the diagnosis could be achieved. Over these 80 patients, and we are still continuing with this examination. Till now, we haven't came across any incidents of cross infection. And to conclude, digital fundus imaging has been found to be a very helpful tool in evaluating neurosurgical patient with combined ease as well as quality over direct ophthalmoscopy, especially during a time of pandemic. And in short, uh, uh, I hope everyone can see the images. This is the assembly of the device, a complete assembly. There is a handpiece, the camera or the eyepiece, and on which it is mounted. That comes for the data transfer and the charging purpose. Below in this diagram, we can in this image, the actually our photograph how the examination was being carried out. We can clearly see the distance maintained in contrast to the direct conventional ophthalmoscopy. This was the images obtained, sample images. We can see the quality is quite clear. The vessels are seen. The periphery of the disc is visible. And amongst the 80 patients, 50 patients were of tumors, 17 were of aneurysms and other vascular anomalies, and 13 patients had hydrocephalus due to other reasons.
I think Dr. Prashant have completed his time. Kunal sir and Dr. Himanshu Arora sir, you people can ask questions if any, and otherwise we can go on to the next speaker.
Dr. Prashant.
Yes, sir.
Just want to ask, was there any comparator, or it was just an observational study?
Sir, it was just an observational study, but at times we did have to share the data with ophthalmologists. So we could just transfer the images via different media, and even the ophthalmologist could interpret the images and could give an accurate diagnosis as compared to the direct ophthalmoscopy. However, we do not have a documentation of the fact, but during practice, we did share the images with ophthalmologists, and they said it was a acceptable quality of images. And also, sir, I would like to mention that there was a very short learning curve involved in this. Only a day was sufficient to learn the technique, and then we could just go ahead with the examination.
So what's your take for the future? What's your take? Direct versus indirect ophthalmoscopy. What's your take in
Sir,
future?
Yes, sir. Definitely, sir. In setups, in non-ophthalmological setups, like in neurological or neurosurgical practice, I think it is a very, very useful and a very handy device, and it can also help in making like real life decisions regarding even the management of the patient. For example, to conclude whether the patient has papilledema or raised ICP or not. If we have such a device in place, we can use it at the time when needed. And with the other advantages, like providing a 40-degree view and enabling the storage and transfer of data, also opens up the option of telemedicine and telemedical consultation. So I think, sir, definitely for the future, it is a very promising aspect of neuro-ophthalmology.
Good afternoon, respected faculty and dear colleagues. My name is Samman Fatima. I am currently pursuing DM Neurology from AIIMS New Delhi. I'll be presenting a case report today. The topic is acute carotid revascularization by carotid stenting for the treatment of stuttering stroke after recent thrombolysis in a nonagenarian patient. We had a 92-year female, known hypertensive, with a history of intermittent sixth sinus syndrome and old right MCA infarct in 2009, from which she had recovered completely. She presented to us at 3 hours of ictus with acute onset right hemiplegia and motor aphasia. At presentation, her BP was 170 by 100 millimeters of mercury and pulse rate was 62 per minute and regularly irregular. Her ECG was showing a normal sinus rhythm with baseline left bundle branch block and frequent VPCs. The imaging, her NCCT head was normal and her CT angio was showing 80% stenosis in the left ICA origin, 20% stenosis in the right carotid bulb and diffuse ICAD. She was subsequently thrombolized with IV tenecteplase 0.25 mg per kg and her NIHSS improved to 4 with complete recovery of the aphasia and partial recovery of the motor weakness from 0/5 to 3/5. However, she continued to have intermittent bradyarrhythmias for which cardio evaluation was sought. On day 3 of the hospital stay, however, she developed acute onset aphasia again. We got an MRI brain done for her, which showed bilateral acute infarcts in watershed areas along with bilateral white matter hyperintensities. After this, the patient was planned for carotid artery stenting after having a detailed cardiac evaluation done. On day 5, however, she complained of typical chest pain. Her ECG was not showing any dynamic changes, but the tropi was elevated, the tune of 184. She was diagnosed as non-ST elevation MI and started on injection LMWH and dual antiplatelets. Her echo was done, which was showing no RWMAs. There was concentric LVH with jerky septal motion attributable to the bundle branch block and ejection fraction of 50 to 55%. Her Holter was also done, which was suggestive of baseline LBBB with first degree AV block, along with frequent sinus pauses, maximum sinus pause up to a duration of 3.2 seconds, a minimum heart rate of 35 beats per minute, and a maximum heart rate of 115 beats per minute. After this, on day 14, she again developed complaints of 3 episodes of acute onset aphasia, which was self-resolving. However, the MRI brain, which was repeated on that day, showed acute infarct in the left anterior corona radiata, and the deficit, however, improved on itself after 1 hour. After this, the next day only, she underwent left carotid artery stenting. The procedure was successful under monitored anesthesia care and temporary pacemaker backup. She tolerated it well, except for transient bradycardia and mild hypotension, from which she recovered subsequently. She was discharged on day 21 after admission and MRS 3 at discharge. This is the CT angio of the patient, sir, showing left critical stenosis 80 to 90% in the left carotid bulb. There is also in the mid CCA left-sided a focal plaque causing less than 50% stenosis. On the right side also, in the origin, there is diffuse ICAD changes along with ICAD changes in the right IC cavernous part also. These are the sequential imaging MRI images of the patient, sir, DWI images showing left corona radiata infarct on the day 3 of admission. She had bilateral infarcts which are not visible in this image. And on the subsequent day 14 also, she developed a new infarct. Then she underwent DSA and carotid artery stenting on day 15. These are the pre-stenting images showing left ICS stenosis 80 to 90%, as we saw in the CT angio. The stent has been deployed in this case, APView, and this is the native image showing stent deployment and maintained patency of the left ICA. The guidelines for carotid artery stenting are heterogeneous, sir, and age and vascular risk factors are important considerations while we consider a patient for stenting. The Society for Vascular Surgery guidelines and European Society for Vascular Surgery 2017 prefer stenting for symptomatic high-risk patients. However, ASA guidelines 2014 say that CEA may be associated with better outcomes in patients with age more than 70 years. NICE guidelines are ambiguous, and they say that if we have a good outcomes, a good volume center with trained physicians and with patients' informed consent, we can take these patients up for carotid artery stenting also. And in recent years, with increased expertise in this area and targeted individualized approaches, there are many more studies that have come up which have shown that even the elderly patients can be taken up. To conclude, appropriate risk stratification and multidisciplinary collaboration, including interventional neuroradiology, cardiology, neuroanesthesiology, and neurology, is important and paramount in ensuring good outcome in these patients. Thank you. Yes, sir. Yes,
Dr.
sir.
Sama, just want to ask one thing. I have two questions to ask. First is what you feel. It was an embolic phenomena,
Yes,
definitely.
Yes.
So you feel.
Yes, it was an embolic phenomenon.
Yeah. So was it a artery to artery emboli or what is a cardioembolic stroke?
Sir, artery to artery emboli. Actually, she had bilateral watershed infarct, sir. And on Holter monitoring, she had frequent some runs of AV and RT also. But artery to artery embolism was high on the list of etiologies because she was having recurrent strokes in the same hemisphere. She definitely had symptomatic ICA in the left hemisphere territory.
So bilateral watershed infarct were the acute infarcts?
Yeah, on the right side also she had acute infarct, sir, with
So how you explain that bilateral watershed infarct?
restriction it was showing.
So how do you explain
there was 20% stenosis on the right side. The right IC was also having stenosis, sir, and although cardioembolic is a possibility, but there was no visible clots or vegetation in the echo. So although we cannot rule that out completely on a transthoracic echo, but we had to treat her with the left IC stenosis, which was symptomatic.
Was it because you managed both at a single time? You managed both at a single time,
yes,
stenting as well as pacemaker. You feel ki it should be done at a single time? It should have done? No.
So actually, the patient was having recurrent episodes, and if we had left her at that only on she was on anticoagulation and dual antiplatelet, and in spite of all that, she was continuously having the embolic phenomena. So it was a multidisciplinary collaboration, and then we took the decision that despite the age and high risk factors for her, we had to take the patient up, and ultimately it led to a good outcome for her.
How much anticoagulation you were giving?
So she was on injection LMWH 0.6 ml subcutaneous BD, and she was in dual antiplatelet sequestrin and clopidogrel.
Did you lift the blood pressures also? Did you lift the blood pressures also?
She did not lower. She was continually in a state. She was kept supine, and her blood pressures we never tried to lower. Sir, it was in the range of 150 to 160 millimeters of mercury. In that way only we used to maintain her blood pressure. Sir.
And one last question I want to ask. What's your take? Why you didn't plan for carotid endarterectomy?
Sir, actually, carotid endarterectomy is actually recommended in ASA guidelines also, and there are many trials which have shown that with age, the post-op stroke and MACE rates are higher in CAS as compared to CEA. But the center should be a large volume center for CEA, and the post-op MACE rate should be less than 3% if we are going for CEA. And our center is not a high volume center for CEA, sir. So we usually go for stenting in our patients.
Your second answer is more logical because in AIIMS we do more of a stenting part rather than endarterectomy.
We can move on to the next speaker, sir. The time is already 10 minutes. It's already over with 5 minutes more.
Good afternoon, sir. Sorry for the delay. I am Dr. Shishir Pandey, DNB Neurology from Indraprastha Apollo Hospital. Is presenting my slide on isolated wrist drop due to cerebral stroke, a role of synkinetic wrist extension in distinguishing from radial nerve palsy. And starting from the introductory part, we have a case of an 87-year-old woman who woke up with left-sided weakness, unable to extend her wrist and fingers, but without numbness, pain, or neck symptoms. On examination, she had moderate weakness of left wrist and finger extensor, and when asked to clench her fist firmly, there was a preserved synkinetic wrist extension. The remaining muscle strength was normal, and as were reflexes, sensory part. On MR scan of the brain showed a focal cortical region of restricted diffusion in the right precentral gyrus, indicating acute ischemia. And we gave intravenous thrombolysis, and she subsequently recovered completely. As the discussion, we are seeing that the patient initial history suggested a left radial nerve palsy, but the lack of typical sensory loss and preserved synkinetic wrist extension following fist closure pointed to an alternative diagnosis. This clinical distinction between the peripheral and the central cause of wrist drop clearly help us to guide the diagnostic investigation, treatment, and we can able to do the timely management. Regarding that, this synkinetic wrist extension, it is a old sign discovered in 1983. From this we can differentiate it from the central versus peripheral wrist drop. In central wrist drop, there is a normal synkinetic contraction of long forearm extensors, as you see in the middle of the middle figure, and in the peripheral wrist drop, from the radial, that is from the radial nerve palsy, synkinetic contraction of long forearm flexors is unopposed, and so the on fist clenching there is an accentuation of the wrist drop, as you see in the right figure. And regarding the conclusory part, I like to conclude that acute ischemic stroke definitely should be considered among the cause of a sudden onset wrist drop when it occurs.
Can I have to speak it again?
Dr. Shishir, can you hear me?
Yeah, I hear you, sir.
Dr. Shishir, can you differentiate this acute central cause of this radial nerve, this wrist drop, along with posterior interosseous nerve injury?
Definitely, sir. Because actually, in the central cause posterior interosseous nerve injury, there is an accentuation of the wrist drop when we clench the fist of the patient. And in the central wrist drop, there is a simultaneous preserved contraction of the long extensors of the forearm that will not lead to the accentuation of the wrist drop. Actually, the brachioradialis and which are directly supplied from the radial nerve is preserved. By this, if there is action of brachioradialis is preserved, we can differentiate it from the posterior interosseous nerve injury.
Dr. Shishir, can you explain the term synkinetic to me?
Synkinetic is the all composite contraction of the whole group, the flexors and the extensor, both deep and the superficial one.
I think we can move to the next participant.
Sir, these are the only participants. Rest of 7 people have not joined, sir.
Oh, very good.
We'll have to conclude the session also.
Okay.
Okay, sir. Thank you for your cooperation, sir. Okay. Thank you, Kunal sir.
Okay.
And Arora.
Thank you.
Bye, Kunal.
Bye. Bye. Bye.